The Communicators, coming to you from the Grand Houses development on 125th Street and Amsterdam Avenue in the Harlem, USA. And this program does not reflect the views, attitudes, whims, deeds, or any proclivities of the Resident Association, the Grand Houses Resident Association, nor does it reflect the views, etc., of the management of this housing complex. However, the program does reflect the research done by the participants in the program, who are sometimes live in living color in studio, and most time by phone. And today we have a very, very popular guest, and we're talking about our Dr. Velva Bowles, who's based in Louisiana by way of North Carolina. Thank you for joining us, my sister.
Thank you for inviting me.
The topic today, ladies and gentlemen, is the psychological impact of visiting prisons as a member of a family who has a loved one incarcerated or someone who is doing other work, community work, social work, etc. So I'd like to do this first. I'd like for you, Dr. Bowles, to talk about the importance and value of visiting loved ones in prison, and then give us the psychological impact of visiting a prisoner.
Well, the first thing is, in the United States, unfortunately, the judicial system seems to be of the opinion of punishment, not rehabilitation. And that is a significant thing to know. With rehabilitation, there comes compassion. With punishment, there's an intent to be harsh and punitive. I recently visited the Louisiana State Penitentiary, better known as Angola. And I went with a religious group that was there for singing praise and trying to give hope. And I personally had never been to the state penitentiary here in Louisiana, and there were several things that were chilling. And I could not help but think what impact this experience would have on a child coming to visit a parent, whether it's during holiday season or just in general. The first thing that is done surprised me a little, but should not have perhaps, is there is a genuine attempt to strip you of any autonomy. You're not spoken to politely, not treated as if they're glad that you're there. The first thing you're told is you must. The language is very directive and assuming, commanding, I guess I should say. And you are stripped of your phone. You do not have the option to leave it in your car. You must place it in an envelope and hand it to one of the officers. As all of you would know, there is a preliminary requirement that you would have sent information of your name and birth date and all this personal types of information just to be put on a list that says, yes, you are permitted to enter this facility. So once you come, they have you remove your shoes. This was a surprise to me. And you stand on a platform, and they tell you, look down as this platform will move. So you're standing on a platform, and like a piece of cargo, this platform moves forward, and I suspect you're either being x-rayed or in some kind, they don't give you information. And after I thought about it, I'm thinking, what if you had a pacemaker or you had some kind of device that what they're doing in scanning your person could interfere with your heart rhythm? You're given no information. You're simply told, remove your shoes, stand right here, look down, the platform will move. So once you have gone through the platform movement, and of course, if you have anything in your pockets, you must take them out, put them in, just like an airport type of evaluation. And once you're on the other side, you're instructed to go and pick up your identification before you're even allowed to put on your shoes. So the opening experience is one of stripping even the citizens of any kind of dignity. if you are coming in, you cannot bring your purse if you are female, and if you must bring something, it has to be a see-through container or handbag. They told us you cannot bring cash with you. Some was even saying you couldn't even have gum in your pocket. So I guess the emphasis there is they want to let you know you are not in any way, shape, or form in control. This is made very prominently clear, and I think part of it is the intentional intimidation that you feel when all of this is going on. Once you have gotten inside, there is a slamming of the door effect. You know at that moment that you are inside under control with people who are armed, and if they misinterpret anything you're doing, they ask first and ask questions later. And this is always very clear in your mind. So again, there's a sense of defenselessness. There's a sense of, I hope they don't hurt me. So it's a trepidation, a feeling of jeopardy, I guess is what I'm saying. So while I'm giving you these blow by blow, I didn't until later project this effect on a child. I don't know what kind of nightmares, what kind of concept of life you would get if you were a regular visitor to this environment. Beginning back to my experience, we were allowed to go into the chapel and the program started. And from what I was told by some, there was a count that they did and someone was missing or they couldn't account for them. And immediately they came in and interrupted the service, took over the mic, made the announcement that some group block should immediately come for lockdown. And you have this overwhelming rush of, oh my goodness, what is happening? The armed persons were there and they were in control. And although there was this hallelujah moment and God is good and bless us, you suddenly felt like, wait a minute, what happened? Where did God go? So the intimidation, I think, is intentional and quite real and felt by all. The sense of helplessness was real and felt by all. And once whatever their count was okay, and we were able to get back to the religion, it almost felt hollow, that you're giving thanks and reverence, and meanwhile brought very publicly to your attention is that there's no real power here. This is just a sound voice. At least that was my response to it all. Once the religious part had finished, and before we moved out of the sanctuary, there were a number of men who came and sung, and their voices were absolutely beautiful. And you just sat there thinking, look at this talent. Look at what is so wonderful in a group of people who have been demonized, who have been marginalized, who are felons, who are convicts. Their terms apply to them. And yet you're listening and saying, despite all of this, they have such beautiful voices and they're harmonizing. And what they're saying is so reverent and respectful. So there's a confusion, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. It creates within you a kind of, how do I put this into context? If they are nice people, why are they in prison? If they're not nice people, how are they able to do nice things? So as an adult with the ability of discernment, I felt confused. And I wondered, how would a child cope with this? What do you say? How do you tell them the dynamics that they're experiencing? And it made me remember how during the shootings at the various schools, there's a major government investment to getting counselors to rush in and talk to these young people who have observed trauma, who have experienced trauma. And I did a search after we talked, Brother Leroy, and there is absolutely no government-sponsored service available to the families of incarcerated persons. I didn't find anything in the state of Louisiana. I did not find anything in these United States. I found a study that was in Switzerland that talked about the trauma. And that reemphasized to me America doesn't just incarcerate, but it almost intentionally marginalizes the very group of the incarcerated. And I think that should not happen. There should be a very active, energized group who want to spare the child of the trauma that comes with being an offspring of someone who has committed a crime requiring incarceration. They did not commit the crime. They should not be treated like the guilty. They should not be ignored. Their contribution should be valued as anyone whose parent is not incarcerated. So I think it brought home to me the absence of adequate support to families who are part of the injured when incarceration occurs. But getting back to the visit, once the church service had finished and we moved to another part, which I guess was their canteen or their cafeteria, the trustees, or I guess the prisoners who they don't think are going to escape, I don't know how, they were the servers of food. Food was delicious, had an excellent cook, and a number of the persons serving, they seemed to me almost like they were secret agents. When they came to serve, they were cautious in what they said, and when they wanted to say something that may be construed, I guess, as personal benefit, it was a whisper. This one fellow who was serving said to me, may I have your email? And see, suddenly, I don't know. Do I have a right? Am I going to get in trouble if I give this person my email? What will my life become like? Will now I be subject to someone's scrutiny because I'm nice to someone who's in prison? So it strips you of all of your autonomy. There's a loss of ability to know what's right and wrong anymore because you're no longer given the privilege of decision. And I said to the young man, not even, at the time, evaluating this, I said, oh, and I have a website. He said, I can't get on the internet. And I thought, oh, so you can do email. And this is what shocked me, and I want to make it clear, and maybe someone have known this all the time. It was a surprise to me. They have something called JPay. JPay is a way in which they can communicate by email, but it costs something. So that implies to me it is another revenue generating process that the penitentiaries have where the inmate can correspond. Of course, they have to give the message to someone who types it in, which means it's totally evaluated and monitored. And the person receiving the message, whenever you reply, that puts you under the same scrutiny.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm now at loss saying, what jeopardy am I in if I start this email correspondence with this inmate? There's no rule book. There's no one explaining this. I've never heard it discussed. However, in criminal cases, I have heard, for instance, on CSI, or if you watch movies like FBI or other kinds of crime-solving 1-hour movies, they often say, we have intercepted the phone conversation, or we have gotten their email correspondences. So I know the federal agencies use such correspondence in investigations. So I have no idea what kind of legal situation am I putting myself if I try to correspond through their JPay system. And if anyone knows about JPay, I'm very interested in knowing who controls it, what kind of support do they give, what risk are you taking if you participate in the program, and equally important, I'm curious, how much does it cost? What are they charging an inmate to use email? I think that information should be outed because it was a large conversation about how much they charge inmates for phone calls. They always call collect. And when you accept it, you get a bill for their call, and sometimes they're exorbitant. One institution, they were charging $8 a minute, and that's in the United States using fully paid for or subscripted phone carriers. They were adding an additional that amount per minute. And no one ever, watches it, monitors it, but the hardship it puts on the family. Many families of the incarcerated can't afford $8 a minute. So there's a number of little, sidebar situations that I've never heard discussed. No one seems to even know, and unfortunately it appears some don't even care. And those who are downtrodden or who are already marginalized, they're very unlikely to introduce controversial conversation out of fear of what will this happen to my loved one? Will they punish them for something I did? And when we talk about human rights going on and what's going on in Hong Kong and what's going on in Sudan and Iran, I think someone needs to look hard at the United States when it comes to their penal system, because there are major, in my opinion, human rights infractions.
Dr. Bowles, in terms of that, there has been, I've seen it on occasion, where someone from the UN, they have a title, and they have visited some of the prisons in the United States, and they have had a report, or reports. So that's something that we have to track down, and the listeners in the audience could very well know that themselves. The point about fleecing is fleecing the prisoners and fleecing their families of monies and the opportunity to even pass on monies. The Attica Rebellion, which took place in the 70s, part of the issues there was the third party, that third party issue. The access by phones and sending money to the prisoners goes through a third person, et cetera. Everything that would normally be a one-to-one, they have monetized for their benefit. Now, some relief has been realized in New York, but that's something that we're here at the Communicators, we're going to have to search out. And of course, we'll pass on that information to you. There are people here in not in the United States, in Harlem, and in the other parts of the black communities in New York City who are right on top of this. So you've given us an issue. I want to go back to the study, the Switzerland study. What exactly was that you came across? What was the essence of that?
And it accentuated pretty much what I felt. Here I am, an adult. I've experienced some horrendous things on my own account, having been in Hurricane Katrina, worked with recovery of the dead and so forth. What they said, that a child, while their formative years, imprint on a parent as a model. And when the model, or you may want to call it the hero, is depicted in a diminutive manner, then that child has effectively been branded. They have a caste mentality that this is my low-level existence. This is where my hero is. They're at the bottom. My hero is told what to do. My hero is punished. My hero can't come home. My hero is not allowed to hug me. So the reaction can be one of two things. One can be denouncement. I refuse to believe that that's my father or that's my mother, or I hate that person because they are in that situation. And you, at a very early age, have imprinted on a child a sense of self-hate, or a sense of family hate, or a sense of strata hate. So if a child, 5 or 6 years old, starts to bring on that energy because grandmother insists every weekend or every other weekend they go see daddy or go see mommy, grandmother's intent is to provide connection between the parent and the child. But there's no resource to ensure that there's no damage being done, There is no resource that checks with the child and say, what has this done to you? How do you feel? Who do you think you are when you say, I am the daughter of this person? How does it make you see the world? How does it shape your perspective? Now, some will have, as I said, the sense of self-hate. That can be depression, low self-esteem. Others can have extreme anger, that they say, okay, daddy can't do anything, but I will. That man bosses daddy, but he won't boss me. So you've already created inside of a child a sense of defensiveness. And if you look at that 15-year-old who joins a gang and wants to shoot somebody with a 9mm, and they're saying, look at that thug, maybe what you should say, when he was 4 years old, I stripped him of his self-esteem. I stripped him of his sense of well-being. I put him in a position to feel like he has to fight for everything. So none of this is what you'll read in a newspaper. You'll hear about Johnny White Boy who grew up this way, and they thought he was marginally retarded, and he did this, and then he killed 33 people in a shootout. Then you have a young man who shoots his best friend down the street. He's a full-blown thug. And you get all of the stuff. He's been a shoplifter, problem in school. His dad's incarcerated. So the language of the American news people and TV supports the very concept that someone parent going to prison creates for you a different reality.
So that's
someone growing up in what would be the typical family.
So what you're talking about, what you're bringing to our attention, and this is the first time that I can remember hearing it, we're talking about collateral damage that's done by, let's say, an authentic criminal. There's collateral damage not only to, quote, the victims, but to the perpetrator's own family. It's even worse. It's even worse when there's...
It may be worse. I mean, think about it. If you have a parent and they have young children, and let's say the person gets 10 or 15 years, the entire life of that child is subjected to what I just described as total diminutiveness. They have no parent with authority. They grow up looking at other people telling daddy what to do and when daddy can come and see him, or if daddy can stay or leave. So that perspective on life is huge. We will punish someone for child abuse if you say, oh, he was locked in a closet or he wasn't allowed to do ABC. But the United States government is not charged with child abuse. When a child can travel many hours to come see daddy and they say, oh, he's in lockdown, he can't be seen today.
Right. So
in a day-to-day thing, that's child abuse. You can't set a child up and then disappoint them. And if a child witnessed something in major America, they got to have counseling. But if a child watch a law enforcement officer manhandle their father or mother, or shout out loud, come in because I have to count you, that horror is not addressed.
Okay, so the therefore in this particular point that you've made is what the community has to be aware of and address, because from my standpoint, there's a 13th Amendment, and the 13th Amendment says slavery is abolished except for, which means that slavery still exists in the United States of America, and all of the collateral damage that goes with enslavement. So when we have a prison population of X numbers, and the predominant figure relates to black people, male and female, then there are things that we have to begin to look at as a community to begin to address the self-image of individuals whose members of the family, whose family members are incarcerated. There are situations where a youngster may know that his family member, let's say the dad, some parent, that they're a tough cookie, and that, you know, they will fight you or harm you at the drop of a hat if they're insulted, etc. So therefore, that could very well carry over to that child, that image, and they can assume that image.
Well, you know what is sad, Brother Leroy? I think that's intentional. If you look at the antebellum and slave history of America, the concept was a child born to an enslaved woman is a slave. So you could be a free man, but if you could not purchase or come to some arrangement with the slave owner who owns your wife, this comes up very clearly in Harriet Tubman movie. That's why I was saying there's so many factions in that movie that someone who was unaware of Black history and slave history needs to see the movie. They have a point there where a free man who is wanting to marry then Anamarima, because that was Harriet's name, her slave name, and he presented to the then owner of her and said, your father wanted Amoretta's mother to be free when she turned 45. And so that was another thing we picked up on. Slave owners did not allow slaves to know their own age. So that's another issue. But anyway, when he presented a lawyer, he said, I saw a lawyer. This is what the free man said. And he said, blah, blah, blah. And he hands the white male the law, decree. And he says, you saw a lawyer, and he repeats it. And he rips the law's decree up, just like that. So a Black man presenting a judgment to a white man was insignificant, totally disregarded. And he repeated, although the woman, Harriet, that was the mother of Harriet Tubman, that was her name, was married to a free man, Mr. Ross, all of her children were owned by the white man because it was decreed that the child of a slave, of a female slave, was a slave. Now, why do I go through that? This is the same mentality. You're saying that children of an incarcerated person is as much a slave per the 13th Amendment as the slave himself, who is the indicted person. So that, to me, is continued perpetuation of slavery. You don't just declare a person who has been found guilty of a felony a slave, property of the state, but you relegate the entire family to that new status of slavery. And I say that because the offspring of this incarcerated does not get the same attention or federal support of other children who may suffer types of trauma similar to that of visiting your enslaved parent.
Okay.
And that would be my argument.
Okay.
That this is justifying a continuation of the then slave time law.
Got it. Excellent. Now, going back to your visit, your recent visit.
Yeah.
And the inmates who was a choral group brought in? Was that a group that came in to sing and present?
Well, there was a religious, the pastor that had a bus of 15 people who invited the 6 of us who accompanied them had once been incarcerated there at Angola. Wow. He had done 20 years at Angola.
Man.
And when he came out, he established a church, and part of his church's missionary work is returning to Angola, I guess during what they call the rodeo. I hope everyone knows that Angola is famous for a rodeo they put on where they fight. They have bullfight, they have different kind of riding and so forth, and they attract international attention of these lifetimers, incarcerated people. And the question is that not also slavery? This penitentiary has become famous and gets all of this money and so forth. No inmate gets paid. And when they work, they're paid here in Louisiana 4 cents an hour. And then they can take money out of that 4 cents an hour for different costs. So when you say slavery, that is the definition. You know, you're working them without compensation, you're working them without due process. And I asked the question, and like I said, the young men would whisper. I don't know if they knew they were being surveilled or what. But I said, what happens if you don't want to go out and work, or you don't want? He says, if you're going to 23 hours of lockdown and 1 hour out. So if you do not accept the recreational whatever offered, and notice how they said is if you have a choice, you will be in 23 hours lockdown and 1 hour recreation. So the choice is to work at their discretion or be into lockdown.
Yes, ma'am. Okay.
So you can see how I had this numbness. And so I couldn't even process all of this. It's like, okay, this is 2019, and this is as close to anything of slavery I've ever heard. My goodness, I'm in the midst. And what got me is when they decided, I guess it was around 9:30 or 10 o'clock, that it was time to do whatever they call it, block check. This booming voice came and said, block check, immediate, I mean now, right now. And you snap and you look, it's like, what's going on? And you see these waves of people going this direction, waves of people going this direction. You see some people holding on, hugging the women. The man is hugging a woman, and the guy with these combat boots and this booming voice come marching in. It was absolutely intimidating. And I know it was intentional. And again, there were no children in the affair that I attended, but I just can't imagine if I were a child and I saw that, that's nightmares. That's the real boogeyman. That's not, if you have a boogeyman, that's the real one. And it was just horrifying to me. I was nearly in tears when I got back to the car. It's like nothing I can do. I'm helpless. I can't complain. I can't question. When he says move, you drop it. And you see them hurrying, and I'm saying, wow, okay, I can go and get in my car. But before I got in my car, I had to pass back through all of these check gates. I had to pick up my ID, and then I had to go and stop at the gate to get my phone. We were in a van that had tinted glasses, and the guy knocked on the window saying, roll down your glass. I guess he didn't like it that he couldn't see who was in the back seat. So, yeah. I was there for about 4.5 to 5 hours, but it took me all the next day to recuperate. I felt anxious and nervous, and I kept having these little visual, if you want to call it short-term post-traumatic stress. I'd have these little snapshots of someone whispering, can you give me your email, and standing up like he hadn't said anything. Or when I would turn to talk to him, act like he was ignoring me. He didn't want to act as if he was engaged with me. And I was like, this is bizarre. But I guess as he knew what he needed to be aware of, I didn't. So it was an unnerving experience. And again, like I say, if it were a child visiting a loved one, it has to adversely affect their sense of being. And my contention is that is part of the slave mentality that said a child of a slave is a slave. And I can use that mantra to say a child of the incarcerated is also enslaved.
What are some of inmate stories that you came away with?
Well, the one that got me, the young man who at the time was acting like he wasn't listening when he was, he told me he was 17 years old when he was found guilty of aggravated rape. And he said, I had a 24-year-old girlfriend, and she was white. I mean, he is black. And he said, if you asked me, did I do it? He said, yeah, but I don't know if it's because I was horny or I had bad judgment. He says, but I was given life imprisonment. I'd served 25 years. It hit me so hard as if you punched me in the gut. A 17-year-old has been in prison 25 years, his entire adult life. And the travesty, and I'm not minimizing it, he didn't kill anyone, but his actions could just as much be adolescent horniness, as he said, as anything else. And I couldn't help but remember when I was in medical school and I went to University of Pittsburgh, there was a young woman of a prominent family, and she was telling me how She had shoplifted, and her brother had been brought up on charges for rape or something or other. And because Granddaddy was a judge, they were seen as adolescents. Their cases were sealed, and now she was on her way training to be a medical doctor, and her brother was going to law school. And that hit me to say, here's a 17-year-old who may have done less egregious actions than these pair, but because of family, money, and knowledge, they've gone on to become professionals, contributing. And this young man who was just rattling off, I have my brick license, and I have all of the credentials he's acquired while incarcerated. I just killed me. It made me take a deep breath and hold it to say, this is the blatant difference. This is the obvious white privilege versus black. A 17-year-old has been incarcerated for 25 years. And I guess when he comes out, he's going to be a sex offender. I don't know how the labeling will go. But that decision or that lapse of judgment or that poor action, I don't know, their level of hostility or aggression has totally erupted his life.
What opportunities might exist for his case to be reviewed or appealed, et cetera? What's
in Louisiana, Governor Edwards, and thank goodness he was reelected, has put forth a bill that adolescents who have gotten these excessive judgments, like life in prison, should be reevaluated because adolescence does not mean adult. And since the environment has been demonstrated to have been hostile, that many of these young people, because they were black, were given these very harsh sentences because of the white judicial process during the sentencing, they are to be reviewed. And according to this young man, he says he has a review February 13th of 2020. And that's why he wanted to establish email with me. And that's my concern. Would my interacting with him by email jeopardize something for him?
Right. Exactly. And what about the reaction of the other members of your group who went to that prison?
Oh, we had women crying. No, like I said, I held back tears, but there were 6 of us in our transport, and one just couldn't speak. She was just crying, and I understood. I couldn't, I didn't have to say, what's wrong with you? I didn't have to say, why are you crying? It's just the overwhelming feeling of I'm leaving them behind. I mean, that's what I felt. You know how if you think about the Marine, you say you leave nobody behind. When I heard this booming voice and these orders, I wanted to take somebody's hand and run. I wanted to be like Harriet. I wanted to say, come on, I'm going to show you to the promised land. Let's get out of here. That mean person can't hurt us. And then that was part of the sense of helplessness. I mean, when you first hear it, you start looking left and right. It's almost like you're saying, who can stop this? Who can make this go away? Why is this how you end the evening? Why is all this love of God and love of people suddenly shattered?
And Doc, what sense of value or importance did you come away with as it relates to regular visits, as not yourself, but relatives and family members of the incarcerated?
It helped me reaffirm the activities that I've been part of. I've worked off and on with a group called Reentry Solutions here in Alexandria, and I don't know if they're still active, but they had done a great job in looking at benefits for ex-offenders. What many of you may not know, and I'm sure this is not unique to Louisiana, ex-offenders that have a felony cannot live in government housing. So if you come out and your family is in a Section 8 house or any kind of rent-controlled house, you can't go live with your family. That is what is called collateral punishment.
Right.
So if you look at how do you come back and rejoin society, people talk about, oh, they gave them the vote. What good is it to have the vote and have nowhere to live? When they talk about recidivism, there are a number of businesses won't hire you with a felony record. But I recently learned that if you buy a bond, if you are bonded, and I say this most of the time, bonding is an insurance. People who do home repairs and so forth are often bonded. What that says is if one of my employees came in and stole your television or whatever, we will make it good because they are insured against it.
Right.
So I shout out to my Black brothers and sisters and families. If you have a young, entrepreneurial, excitable young man coming out of prison and everybody talks expungement, you should be talking bonding. Get a community fund together and put a bond insurance on the young man or young woman. If they are bonded, they can work in a bank. If they are bonded, they can get hired by people like Walmart who will not hire a felon unless he or she is bonded. So we need to know what are the loopholes that everybody else is using that we don't know about. This young man or woman can't even rent in an apartment. When you go to rent an apartment, they look at your credit record and they look at your address history. If your address is a prison, you can't rent an apartment unless you are bonded. So we need to understand how to get out from under the the enslaved markings once we've done the time. That it's important to know how do you restore that citizen. And many of us just assume you get out of prison and go back to life as general. That's not true. You can't get a job. You can't live in government support housing. Many times if your family has been getting government support, they can get it shut off if you show up. So we have a number of ghost people. They get out of prison, they live in the basement somewhere. Right. Or the guy will have a girlfriend and he's living with his girlfriend and his wife and children are somewhere else. And you're saying, why would he do that? Because if he shows up, his family's status drops.
Man.
So we need to be aware of why some of these behaviors are there and then start to say, wait a minute, United States government, how do you put a sanction on Turkey or on China? Talk about human rights, and these are your injustices.
Exactly. Okay. A lot of food for thought, a lot of opportunities exist for the elements in the community to do some things that can address the needs of young people whose family members are incarcerated. Before we conclude, the communicators is the communicators, and that is plural. It is not just Brother Leroy. In studio, we have our brother engineer, Brother Doug. He may want to ask you a question or make observations per your visit to Angola. Brother Doug?
Yeah. Hey, thank you, Brother Leroy. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Doc. And just aside, thank you for your wonderful comments yesterday about the local stuff. So thank you for that. When you were talking about Angola, I myself was in a maximum security prison as a teenager here in New York State, and I was in there right before they had the Attica Rebellion. I was in there doing the Attica Rebellion. I was in one of the other two. There's only two maximum security prisons. I was in the other one, which is Dannemora, which is attached to the Dannemora prison for the criminally insane. So when they put you up there, if you don't act right, they'll take you through this special door, and you no one to see again. But during the Attica Rebellion, I wanted to say something about the visit thing because it really struck me. During the Attica Rebellion, my which is an 8-hour ride from New York City, people would ride up there. My family would ride up there to come see me, and because they thought that if no one came to see me, that they would kill me. This is what my mother thought, so she would bear that ride. And I just wanted to say that thank you for mentioning the fact that about the third party thing, because before the Attica Rebellion, when you wanted to write home, you wrote a letter, and the letter went to the prison staff, and after they reviewed the letter and approved it, then you were allowed to mail it. So if you wrote a letter, like I remember being a teenager and writing some teenager stuff to my girlfriend, and they sent the letter back to me and said, "You can't say this." This is when I realized that they censor everything that everybody does. And after the Attica Rebellion, they stopped doing that. So I wanted to thank you for bringing that up because that kind of struck home when you said that.
Okay.
Well, I think it's important, Brother Leroy, that the people, such as myself and others, who may not have that blood connection to someone in the state penitentiary, and I say state because Louisiana's is particularly heinous, it has to be people who do not have that contact who are speaking out. So the people who have the incarcerated, they're afraid. Right. New Iberia here in Louisiana, they even brought charges because he were transporting prisoners, hanging them upside down and beating them, and then returning them to the penitentiary grounds. And when the parents complained, took it to court, the court ruled that the warden had done nothing wrong because the 13th Amendment stated that those that were indicted were the property of the state. So this, again, validates slavery. So as long as he did not take their life and the punishment they felt was adequate for whatever his reasoning was, he had not violated anything that was considered civil rights of those prisoners.
Wait a minute, run that again. When? Right.
This is recently, in fact, Brother Jay in Lafayette covered the story that there was an instance in New Iberia, Louisiana, where there were proof. Family members took to the court an objection of civil right violation because a number of prisoners were being transported to some location other than the prisoner, and according to what they alleged, these persons were hanged upside down and beaten. I don't know the significance of hanged upside down, but that's where it was reported, and then transported back to the prison. And when it went to court, they did hear it, and the judgment said there was no violation of civil rights of these prisoners because the 13th Amendment stated they are property of the state, and that the warden had acted within those boundaries in meting out that punishment.
So I made contact with Jay. Jay can give me the details.
They will give you details on the New Iberia situation. In fact, they have launched for many, I guess it's 2 years now, for many months, trying to get so many sheriffs and deputies prosecuted for various infractions. And on his show, there's been a number of people who've come on and given reports. So yes, Brother Jay of Lafayette, Louisiana, I think it's KIEE, can give you some details on that. And I think I mentioned Professor Angela Bell of Southern University. She is, thank God, a black female who has an endowed chair. And the significance of that, I hope everybody understands. When there's an endowed chair, you have a guaranteed salary level. And one of the problems with a lot of our HBCUs, professors do not have guaranteed salary levels and therefore cannot be as active. Their activism is limited because they need to live too. But thank God Dr. Bell has, in her position, created a classroom setting for her third-year law students that does a number of what she calls reparative justice. And she was a leader in getting Louisiana to overturn the non-unanimous vote for life in prison.
Okay, but she's not connected with the Iberia piece.
Well, she's been interviewed. I guess I should finish. She's been interviewed several times by Brother Jay, on his radio show.
Okay, in connection.
And she's very adept in explaining and giving you the real stuff because she is a lawyer and law professor.
What's her first name?
Angela Allen-Bell. Professor Angela Bell.
Okay. Very good. I'll tell her you sent me.
Yes. Oh, she'll remember me. I think we interacted at the Roots. They have a very interesting dynamic that was held at Southern University in the spring where they brought together a number of community leaders, and that's how I got introduced to what she's doing. She had several seminar-type workshop presentations where she had anywhere from 6 or 8 of her third-year law students presenting the case that they had worked on that during the year. And a number of them were trying to identify civil rights workers who had never, during the time it was Jet Magazine and Ebony and whatever black publications covered our struggles, but white news didn't cover it. And her point was there are many people, not just Rosa Parks or Martin Luther King, involved in the movement. So her class, by some assignment, identified other featured people in Greensboro, North Carolina, Winston-Salem, and others that were paramount in getting the Selma, Alabama marches and things organized and Atlanta organized. And she has had them do the legal work to get them recognized as heroes, and in sometimes even posthumously, which means after death, restored to some level of, because some of them are still excommunicated. They can't get a passport to travel. They were forced to drop out of college because they participated. So we don't even look at what happened to the lives of those who fought in the 60s to provide what is available today. And we black folk had never, in any kind of organized structure, tried to repair the injustices against those who were, in fact, our, as I say, ceiling breakers, our marchers, our heroes. We let white people dictate who the heroes are.
Dr. Velva Bowles, once again, an interview you goes in, it's like telling somebody where the Golden Road is. And when they find the Golden Road, they find platinum, rubies. All these are different roads. and we thank you for your diligence and your sharing of time with us on the Communicators, the Wisdom Table, and other shows. I'm finding out that people are spinning off and interviewing you by themselves without Brother Leroy, and that's that's the way it's supposed to be. That's the way. That shows growth and development. People are getting their confidence together and doing what they need to do to get information out to our people. May God continue to bless you and your family, and we will be in contact with you very soon, my sister. God bless you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to share. Like I said, when I learn it, I'm almost bursting to make sure someone smarter than me gets a piece of it.
Thank you, ma'am. Peace.
All right. Until next time. Bye now.
Bye now. And this has been the first segment of the Communicators on this Sunday. And coming up is another interview, and will be a very great interest to you all. Stay tuned.